Good evening. It's really good to be here today. Reshaping reality. What does it mean to all of us? I think everyone's perspective is different, and that's what makes this even more exciting. Taking from one of the many brilliant quotes of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, he said that if one is aware of even one single shortcoming within oneself, it is far more useful than 1,000 that you may find in others. It allows you to actually accept your faults and your truths. And therefore, it is something that you can change, you can correct, and you can reaffirm, and then move on. So reshaping reality is something that changes over a period of time. For me, it's like shapeshifter, because it kind of comes across all through your journey, and you find that the more you look at it, the more you ask questions, it kind of allows you to adapt, change, and do things that you may never have thought of. So one of the most weird questions that used to be thrown at me all the time by journalists and people from across the media: how is it that you are able to take the pressure from society being a woman in the booze business? I used to think that was really weird, because I didn't think of it that way. I mean, am I not part of the same society? Do I not live with the same people? And if I choose to walk a path that may be different, but is my truth, then at some stage society would evolve and they would have to match their reality with mine. So what is this shapeshifter doing to us? How do we really look at it? Do we start by actually looking at our lives and saying, do I need to change my approach to living life completely? Or do I analyze it and say, what is it that I'm doing wrong and how can I correct it? Or am I trying to erase the imprints of my childhood? Is something I know a lot of people tend to do. Blame everything on what happened before. Do I erase that? Do I rewrite it? Because sometimes they leave an imprint that clouds our very being. Or is it simply revisiting a part of ourselves which actually may be in conflict with where we want to be? I think it's tiny steps that allow us to make small changes in our lives, one step at a time. And the most important thing is to accept and to acknowledge that in all of these little instances that we find ourselves, there is a pattern that we need to break. Sometimes these patterns or these consequences that we find ourselves in are very often of our own making. Sometimes we realize that we are being hurt or we are being used or manipulated simply because we don't have the ability to say no. We fill ourselves with anger and self-pity. We are exhausted with the thoughts that fog our brains. Is that going to help? It is always at that point better to maybe take a step back, relax a little bit, calm down, quiet the mind, and listen to something that your mind and your body both is telling you. Now this is a discovery I made over a period of time, that every time you do something, there is an inner antenna, an inner compass that is inbuilt in our system. Every time you speak a sentence, say a word, talk to someone, you know whether you are right or you are wrong. Should you have said that? Should you not have said that? Most of us don't even acknowledge the existence of this little voice that's within our system. But it is that little voice, if we learn to listen to it, just simply declutter the mind, calm down, erase all the noises around us, and listen. If we listen, you'll find that almost anything that is thrown at you, you have the ability to face it, reshape it, adapt, and then change. I'd like to give you a few eureka moments in my life that made me understand this concept. At that time, I probably didn't realize that it was that I was doing. But when I looked upon it, I said to myself, dear God, wow, I actually did change. I didn't even know. I took it for granted. That is what I was meant to do. Number one, it goes like this. I'd like a martini, please. Make mine with vodka. Shaken, not stirred. The images it conjured for me were of the seriously dashing agent doing all kinds of crazy stuff, martini on the side. I was a huge fan of Ian Fleming and James Bond. And then came the movies and the incredible Sean Connery. And I was completely sold, the man and the martini. But then bartending happened. Suddenly, I realized the difference between gin and vodka, between stirred and shaken, and I was completely shattered. My idol, this dashing guy, was cheating. He was forsaking the real martini, the powerful, power-packed one, for a diluted version of the drink. I was completely disillusioned. What happened? Why? I, of course, made all kinds of excuses for him because, after all, he is James Bond and I was completely besotted. So I made excuses. My inner voice was telling me that I was being an idiot. It was telling me to grow up a bit, face reality. I could hear it telling me that. But I consistently ignored it. I refused to listen because I wanted to continue in my fantasy. Till I grew up, accepted my reality. I still like Mr. Bond though. Number two, for people who are not in the world that I live in, it might be a little trivial. But my earliest recollection of reshaping my reality was a drink called the Bloody Mary. It used to come in really short, stubby, ugly glasses, almost manly whiskey glasses. I thought to myself, is this drink called Bloody Mary? Or have they changed the name to Bloody John? And I said to myself, I think it's time to give Mary a makeover. And that's what I did. I put Mary in a really good-looking glass, elegant. I zipped up her flavor a little bit, made it even more zingy. And then I gave her a whole wardrobe of garnishes on top that she could use one day of the week instead of just one classic tired old celery stick. The revisited Mary was extremely happy, and everyone who chanced upon her was happier. For me, it was a path to freedom. It completely changed my perspective of what I can do to change something and make history just by believing that Mary needed a makeover. Just one simple drink that can change your reality. and make you free of everything that binds your mind to say, this is classic, you cannot make changes, you can't do anything. Third story. I was in college. There were floods in Morbi. It was inundated, no communication whatsoever. A group of amateur radio operators, or hams as they were called, from Bombay, decided to go there to reset up the communications network because people had no clue what was happening. My dad was one of those, so he went with his group, but said that he needed someone to man the station at Bombay, which was in my house. Now, I had heard my dad on his radio, because every evening he would be there, but I really didn't pay it much attention. But here I was, that in one day I had to learn how to man that station. He quickly showed me the roads, wrote down everything and said, this is your station for the next 1 week, man it. It was something that was just thrown at me out of the blue, but lo and behold, day 2, I was so comfortable sitting there saying things that were really weird, using my father's call sign, and it felt like I was out in space somewhere. But it changed my reality and told me that anything is possible. A little crazy, but there it was. And then, of course, there was a time in my life, about 8 years into my hospitality career, that I decided I want to go to B school. So I made all the applications, and while I was doing that, I realized that 3 years in hotel management was not equivalent to a degree, which means I couldn't do B school. I was so annoyed that I took a break from work so that I could get a degree. I got that degree. But while I was on break, a friend of mine who owned an ad agency said to me that, you know what, you've taken a break, why don't you come and work for me? I'm like, I'm a hotel operations person, I work on the floor. I don't know anything about advertising. He said, no, I think you'll do a good job. I was seriously apprehensive, but that little inner voice pushed me and said, I think you can do it. So I said, anyway, I'm free, don't have a job, let me give it a shot. If it doesn't work, I can always go back to hospitality. That's not going anywhere. And they were the 2 best years of my life. 2 years in advertising. It was crazy, but I realized that, again, sometimes, even if it's circumstance that puts you in a situation, if you listen to yourself and say, what have I got to lose? I can only learn more. You'd go out there and you'd get that done. And it was fantastic. And then came Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio. Now that was a movie that actually said to you and showed you the capacity your brain and your mind has to do things that you'd never imagine. Of course, he did it in a crazy old way, but it told you that the mind has the power to absorb everything, even stuff that you are not aware of. And just when you need it, it pushes it back at you and gives it to you in exactly the way you need it. And you didn't even know it was there. And I find that every single time. When I'm dipping my nose into a glass of wine, into a glass of whiskey, trying to figure out its nuances, there it is. It takes me to the strangest of places, because every smell that I smell reminds me of something or somewhere. And it tells you that the mind is such a brilliant piece of equipment that if you allow it to be what it is, and if you send out positive vibes to the mind, it will send the same messages back to your body, and it will keep you there optimistic all the time. Now, does that mean that I didn't have any pitfalls? I have all these positive stories to share with you. Of course not. I had many, plenty, more than my share. Heartbreak as well. But the important thing is that this whole sense of being positive, this whole sense of listening to yourself, accepting that somewhere you have maybe taken action or not taken enough action, which has got you to where you are. And once you've done that, you know that you can correct yourself and find yourself a path, and to be there, put yourself out there and say, hey, I will overcome. So, you don't need to be down and about. Change. Change from down to optimistic. Don't be heartbroken. Make yourself whole again. And you can. Change career paths and be successful. Overwrite the imprints of your past. And in doing that, you can not just reshape your own reality, you can reshape your today and your tomorrow. And never mind if life throws a curveball at you. We all know what COVID did to us. It was a massive curveball. But in spite of being in that situation where we had no clue whether we would ever come out of our houses and when we would, our team got together and wrote a book, sitting at home, from each other's computers, emails, and when we were finally able to meet, we actually went out and even printed that book. And therefore, even out of a curveball, there is learning. You can either choose to use that, or you can choose to be sorry for yourself. But don't be. Because when you decide that you're going to do something about every curveball, when you know that you have the capacity to do it, when you listen to the inner you, calm down, quiet the mind, you will find that you can do almost anything. Thank you very much.